This man never expected that right after he awakened, he would receive the weakest identification skill. And in this world of swords and magic, talent and class define a person's social status. So, with no combat power, he was left with no choice but to team up and scavenge what others discarded. His only skill was using the identification ability to find the most valuable items on monsters. Even though his slow speed often earned him scolding from teammates, there was nothing he could do. This was because both his class and combat skills were inherited, and they couldn't be changed later in life. I'd originally thought that while his life would be tough, he could still get by. But one day, during an adventure in a dungeon, his party stumbled upon the corpse of a B-class hellhound. This monster was quite rare, so the captain immediately ordered Ein to go collect its materials. Though Ein disliked them, he had no choice but to follow their instructions. Just then, the captain noticed a fork in the path and more hellhound corpses along the way. Ein had a feeling that something was off, because according to the guild map, there was only one route. However, the captain ignored his concerns, wanting only to find more rare treasures. They told Ein he could leave, but if he did, he wouldn't get any rewards. After some hesitation, Ein decided to stick with them, as this was the only team willing to accept him. They ventured deeper into the dungeon, where the hellhound corpses became more numerous and more grotesque than anything they'd seen before. The captain believed he was about to strike it rich, but soon, countless eyes appeared in the depths of the passage, followed by a swarm of hellhounds. It became clear that the corpses were from internal conflicts among the hellhounds, and they were no match for this many. The captain quickly devised a plan. The mage sensed his intentions, and before Ein could react, he was attacked by magic. They wanted Ein to act as bait, buying them enough time to escape. The captain and the mage ran off, leaving Ein behind. Ein felt utterly hopeless, but there was nothing he could do. His whole body was paralyzed by the magic, and all he could do was watch as the hellhounds closed in. As the pain intensified, the paralysis wore off, and Ein grabbed a rock from the ground to defend himself. Finally able to fight back, Ein emptied his backpack, hoping to use the food as a distraction to escape. But after running for what seemed like forever, he realized that the path ahead ended at a cliff, its depths seemingly endless. With the hellhound still pursuing him, Ein didn't know what to do. He didn't want to be devoured by the monsters, but the only option left was to jump. In that moment, as he leaped off the cliff, Ein felt despair. He cursed the world, but most of all, he cursed his own helplessness. His life had always been miserable, always looked down upon by others. Now, he thought, he could finally end it all. But when he opened his eyes again, he was still alive. He saw an elf kiss his forehead, and by the time Ein fully woke up, the elf had vanished. Ein thought it might have been a dream, but all his injuries had healed. In front of him stood a giant tree. This wasn't a dungeon anymore, and Ein thought perhaps he'd entered heaven. Before he could process everything, a drop of water fell onto his eye. Suddenly, Ein remembered that he still had his identification skill. When he used it, he was stunned to find that the water was from the world tree, capable of instantly healing all his wounds. The tree before him had to be the world tree. The magic in this world, Ein realized, was generated by absorbing magical essence from the earth, and it was the world tree that produced the essence. This was a story from long ago, and Ein couldn't understand why the magic still existed even after the world tree had withered. However, he had never imagined that this mythical plant would appear deep in the dungeon. Ein knew the world tree had saved him, and whether it could hear him or not, he felt immense gratitude. Just then, he heard a woman's voice responding to him. At first, Ein thought he had misheard, but he looked around and found no one. He knew he was alone, and his only thought was to find a way out because there was no food here and no one would come to rescue him. It was eerily quiet, with no monsters in sight, and Ein felt he was finally safe. Suddenly, his left ear was sliced off, and then two of his fingers were severed. Although in excruciating pain, Ein used his identification skill again. As he examined closely, he saw an S-class goblin, more terrifying than any hellhound. Ein was utterly despairing. Up until now, the most powerful monsters he'd encountered were B-class, and he could barely handle them, let alone an S-class. He had no combat power, so he was no match for the goblin.